What's up, guys? Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be talking about my bioidentical progestin experiment. So, if you guys have been following along, basically the last update I gave was I was trying a synthetic bioidentical progestin to activate the progesterone receptor a little bit and get some anti-androgen activity, as well as essentially function without any endogenous testosterone or DHT, and in turn use a more anabolic and tissue selective AAS as my sort of like hormonal foundation, which also happens to 5-alpha reduce into a less androgenic metabolite in scalp, prostate, and other androgen affected tissues that normally have a high concentration of DHT. So, the plan originally was to do this. By the way, it's nandrolone. If you didn't get that from the first video, it's nandrolone, and that's why I had the video about how to test if your nandrolone is real shortly thereafter. But the problem with the nandrolone only is it only aromatizes 20% as much as testosterone to estrogen. So the original plan was to use this estradiol cream transdermally, sort of like on the scalp itself, to kind of like provide the amount of endogenous estradiol that would be necessary to maintain physiological functions and prolong the anagen phase, in the absence of a sufficient amount of testosterone, which would normally fulfill that mechanism. Because normally you would have everything sort of like calibrated perfectly when you're producing testosterone. You have testosterone, it aromatizes a certain amount to estrogen, which then, maintains bone mineral density, maintains libido, maintains, everything to do with estrogen. And, if you're just using nandrolone only, you're only aromatizing 1/5 as much into estrogen. And honestly, I think it's less than that in actual practical application, because I've seen guys blood work on even upwards of 800, 900 milligrams of nandrolone per week, and they had low E2 when they did a sensitive assay profile, or sensitive assay blood test. Not the guys who are using the non-LC MS assays are the ones who are seeing normal estrogen levels. But typically, if you actually go get a high sensitivity liquid chromatography tandem mass spectrometry lab test on your estrogen, if you're on nandrolone only, you're probably going to see that you actually have low E2. So using a replacement amount to replicate the anabolic activity of testosterone, obviously you need some sort of estrogen source. So the plan was originally to use the estradiol cream to fulfill that, and then also potentially get some like localized action at the hair follicle by applying it like right on my head. So I was hoping to get like a certain amount of systemic absorption, but like not too much, so I don't push myself over the therapeutic reference range for men, because obviously, we're not trying to like grow like boobs and whatnot. We're trying to just like get right in like the sweet spot of that reference range. So, but then in addition to that, there's estrogen receptors that can that mediate hair growth through estradiol, and I figured maybe if I could get some selective growth at those receptors, by literally applying it where you want the growth, then perhaps I could kind of like knock out two birds with one stone, because I had to get my systemic E2 up anyways, and then I could also, potentially get some sort of like localized growth effect. The reality is, first of all, the scalp application of estradiol cream, it doesn't seem to be very efficacious in my opinion. First of all, when you actually look at blood work, it doesn't translate into a significant increase in your E2. It should have been more than enough to get my E2 to where it should be, and it just wasn't. I had I posted my estradiol levels in a previous video, and that was actually the same blood test, but it was like the bottom of the reference range. In addition to that, it wasn't giving me any like selective growth like I was hoping. So not only did it not help in terms of providing some sort of like localized growth effect, my blood work wasn't even getting to where it should be with that. So it was like, in order to get it to where it needs to be, I would either need to, like, I don't even know if the body metabolizes it correctly when you use E2 on your scalp. On the scalp itself, I feel like the absorption is suboptimal to achieve that kind of like two birds with one stone effect. And even the localized activity, if you were trying to not get it systemic, it doesn't seem to help very much, in my opinion. And I have yet to see any significant regrowth from topical E2 whatsoever, to be honest. And typically any regrowth mediated by it seems to be just in conjunction with other concurrent interventions and therapies that you could get attributed mistakenly to the E2 cream, when in fact it was, something else you were doing. So just like testing out that variable alone, I felt like, well, I didn't feel like it, just like it was blatantly obvious it wasn't working. So the problem with it was I couldn't continue with nandrolone monotherapy because there was not enough E2 in my body to make it a healthy. First of all, it's not a long-term thing anyways, but even if I was evaluating it as such, there's no way you could do that long-term without having a sufficient amount of E2 in your body. So the cream wasn't working. So the next step would be you either add something in that aromatizes to a sufficient amount of E2, which, what would that be? Probably testosterone, but then that defeats the whole point of the experiment to begin with. Or you just use straight up E2 oral or injection, which is like, how a girl would do it for birth control or for like transitioning male to female, whatever. But you would use a microdose to get you into like 30 picogram area, as opposed to a girl would use it to get to like, hundreds. So anyways, that's the next step kind of thing. But I didn't have that on hand at the time. So I kind of had to like just abandon the experiment entirely, and just it wasn't a very I couldn't conclude anything from it because I wasn't able to do it properly. So like the next time I do it will be the therapeutic dose of nandrolone again, which would be, like 100 to 150 maybe, and keep in mind that's just to like, we're talking about fulfilling the same anabolic level or like, capabilities in muscle tissue that testosterone would otherwise provide. So you can probably get I'm not going to get into that. But anyways, around that, probably with maybe like 0.5 milligrams of oral estrofem or estradiol, like a literal tablet, and get me probably close to ideally 30 to 40 picograms. I kind of want to push it a bit higher because I know you can get good regrowth from pushing your E2 higher, but obviously you got to be careful about how high you push that, because you don't want to get yourself into like transitioning territory if that's not your goal, which obviously that is not what I'm trying to accomplish. So, but if you are, obviously, more power to you. I'm just saying that's like for my goals in particular, I'm not trying to do that. So, that's sort of like the next step. But before I could get, prepare myself for that, because it's not like I just had the tablet on hand. I can just and I don't readily keep those things on hand because I've never done something like that before. My next experiment that I sort of want to delve into is SARMs as a functional anti-androgen. So the thing is a lot of the people that are like hardcore, have aggressive hair loss, they are forced. They go the typical trend, they start off with the ketoconazole shampoo, and they maybe do minoxidil next, or they'll do finasteride, and then the people with really aggressive androgenic alopecia, they don't respond to these treatments, even at all. Then they jump to dutasteride. They still don't get anything from that, because even if they're wiping out 97% or 90% of their systemic DHT, scalp DHT, you have to use several milligrams of dutasteride to truly wipe out all scalp DHT. We're not talking about just serum in your body, we're talking about scalp. So most people don't, most people will respond to that, but a lot of people will either have, could have side effects, or potentially they just have such aggressive hair loss to begin with that crushing systemic DHT is not enough to attenuate further androgenic alopecia, and the subsequent massive spike in scalp testosterone levels as a result of inhibiting 5-AR causes almost an exacerbated effect in a minority of individuals as well. So like obviously this is a sort of like a very niched topic for like a very specific subsect of aggressive hair loss, but I'm trying to, the whole point of all these experiments is to try and get down to like what is going to help get it done for everyone, not just like the people who respond well to finasteride or RE5841, because obviously those people can just do that and like be good to go for a couple decades probably. These things can only sustain you for so long too. Like if you're just inhibiting DHT, it's not like you can do that for a lot of people. It's not going to sustain you your whole life. You can't just inhibit like 40% of your scalp DHT and expect to have a perfect head of hair until you die. To be honest, most people, it's just not going to work out like that. You might get some temporary results, but long term you're probably gonna see some regression. So anyway, kind of getting off track here. So what can be accomplished with SARMs? That basically the typical way transition most people do that have aggressive hair loss is they start with something like ketoconazole or minoxidil or finasteride. They don't respond to that, so they go, okay, let's add in a topical anti-androgen, let's add in dutasteride, let's add in this. They still don't respond. Then they start looking at like really exploration type intervention, like things that are outside of the normal scope of what you would find from like the most basic introduction video to hair loss prevention, where 99% of them are just going to be like, you're just going to combat DHT and you'll be fine. A lot of times, some of these people that have really aggressive loss and get really deep into the rabbit hole of this stuff, they'll go down to like, they're using like anti-androgens, systemic anti-androgens meant for like transitioning from male to female. Like that's how intense this stuff gets. They're using things like aldactone, which is, you probably know it as a diuretic, but it's actually an anti-androgen too. A very poor one in my opinion for males who are trying to transition to female, and they use it in conjunction with estrogen. And then there's things like what is it? Cyprotetorone acetate or something. I forget what the full name of it is, but it's basically like a hardcore systemic anti-androgen that crushes test and DHT. Then you have things like bicalutamide, hydroxyflutamide, and some of these people are literally like fighting their androgen receptors and crushing systemic endogenous androgens, because it's like they've gotten to the point where it's so serious that they essentially have to like castrate themselves in order to prevent further loss. So I wanted to find something that could like replicate this sort of like hardcore anti-androgen effect without like destroying manhood or muscle tissue. So if you actually look at the synthesis of first generation SARMs, they're based on the chemical structure, many of them anyways, are based on the chemical structure of bicalutamide. So the way something like S1 or Andarine, which is S4, function is sort of the same mechanism of bicalutamide to some extent. But the thing is the binding affinity of these SARMs is created in such a way that it's much better than these systemic anti-androgens that people are using for hair loss prevention in like the hardcore niche. And so they bind harder to the androgen receptor, which offsets endogenous androgens to a significant extent just via the binding affinity. In addition to that, they exert tissue selective anabolic activity in muscle and bone. So you already know you're fulfilling, well, not you, but I just mean, in the studies, you would see that anabolic activity can be sustained with SARMs as opposed to traditional systemic anti-androgens. Basically, muscle tissue and bone mineral density just like plummet in parallel to something that has no anabolic activity and is simply meant to occupy the receptor and antagonize endogenous androgens. So if you have like a systemic anti-androgen used for transitioning from male to female, what they're doing essentially is preventing, in layman's terms, preventing testosterone and DHT in the body from either being produced or from getting to the androgen receptor and transcribing their effects in tissues. So, but what SARMs do is they bind to that same androgen receptor, and instead of just preventing anabolic activity from occurring in the body, it fulfills that, mechanism that testosterone would otherwise do, maintaining the bone mineral density, maintaining muscle tissue, etc., at therapeutic levels, without allowing the androgenic, to some extent, side effects that would be induced via 5-alpha reduction of DHT and the inherent androgenicity of testosterone. So, the current experiment that I'm doing is actually to, like, a lot of guys, when they use SARMs, they use it as a performance enhancing context. The way I wanted to explore it, and that I theorize it could work as a more efficacious alternative to these hardcore systemic anti-androgens, is these drugs were created as more effective alternatives to things like bicalutamide and all these like first generation, steroidal and non-steroidal anti-androgens. But the way they excel, in addition to having better binding affinity, is they're anabolic. So what I'm seeking, it's like the perfect storm. So I'm trying to see, basically what I did was I started, anecdotally, Andorine S4 is like one of the most efficacious SARMs in terms of not overall safety profile, because we all know about the vision side effect, which is unfortunate, but in terms of anabolic activity relative to androgenic activity in scalp, it's one of the more efficacious ones out there that we know of. Anyways, so basically I wanted to try and get to titrate from a very, like, literally like 5 milligrams a day, and titrate up to the right before the vision side effect would kick in, and see how much antagonizing activity I could get at the androgen receptor up here, while like maintaining anabolic activity in the body with an absence of side effects. You know what I mean? So basically, obviously this is a bit of a complicated video, and I understand I'm kind of like going off on a tangent here, but just bear with me. I'm just trying to explain what I'm doing. So basically I started with 5 milligrams a day, and I just titrated up slowly, and I'm just watching to see what happens, because some people, they do report regrowth when they use SARMs at certain dosages. There's a certain threshold where you start to actually increase systemic androgenic activity in the body simply by the dosage being so like high, because they're, the therapeutic level of anabolic activity is typically met at a much lower dosage than what like people are using it for performance enhancement, not for maintaining exactly what they have from their endogenous testosterone, like I'm trying to sort of do. You know what I mean? So it's like the level at which you can maintain could, in theory, have the SARM, compete at the androgen receptor, knock off a bunch of test and DHT that would otherwise be present in the scalp, lower the androgen index in your scalp tissue, while simultaneously maintaining the exact same level of anabolic activity in the body. That's like the extent of, that's pretty much the experiment in a nutshell. So basically that's where I'm at right now, is using S4 with therapeutic TRT. And I mean like literal therapeutic TRT. I'm going to do a video posting my blood work from my last bloods, but it was like, you'd be shocked at how normal my test levels are. Like a lot of people think because I've done experiments in the past where I push it above like therapeutic ranges just to like really push whatever experiment I was doing to, evaluate how efficacious it was. My test levels are like, my free T was like maybe high normal, if you would even consider it that, and my total was like normal as hell. So anyways, I'll get into that in another video, but basically this is exactly what I'm doing right now for you guys who wanted to update. The estrogen component, which would otherwise not be fulfilled if I wasn't using TRT, is being fulfilled because I'm on TRT. So it's like, if you were going to do SARMs only though, which is also something I may potentially look at in the near future, that's where the use of exogenous E2 would need to be used as well, kind of like the nandrolone example I gave. So some like future things I want to do, higher dose SARMs with exogenous estradiol with no test. That's something I want to look at, or just enough to like maintain the neuroprotective benefits of testosterone, because there are things testosterone does in the brain specifically too that otherwise cannot be replicated by things like nandrolone or things like whatever. Like if you actually have zero test in your body, like you're gonna like screw some shit up here. I'm telling you. So like there's like a lot of evidence to support that too, that there are neuroprotective effects, and like it has an effect on how your brain health actually is. So like in some capacity there might need to be like a microdose of testosterone in there, but like far less than what I'm like evaluating right now, which is like right in the smack dab in the therapeutic area. It's kind of hard to explain, but anyways, I think you guys probably get the idea. Basically, you need to have some sort of estradiol source, whether that comes via endogenous testosterone, whether it comes through exogenous testosterone, whether that comes through literal exogenous E2 administration. Either way, it fulfills the same mechanism. One is just far more androgenic than the other. So, yeah, it's probably too soon to say what's going on with the S4. I did, in fact, induce the vision side effect at a dosage much lower than I anticipated. So I was hoping to get up to about 50 and kind of like maintain there and not have any issues. But instead, what happened was when I got to 25, I already started noticing a bit of a tint and a bit of an issue adjusting in from light to dark. And when I got to 50, it was like brutal. So I might have to lower it back down. Normally, most people would not notice anything on 25 milligrams per day, but I was like I'm literally walking around with like sepia filter on right now in my eyeballs. So, which is not a sustainable practice in my opinion. So that's also why like I don't necessarily want to push it like far beyond that, because I'm trying to find something that's sustainable long term. It's not sustainable to walk around with like a green tint for the rest of your life unless you like really don't care. But who knows about the long term ramifications that could potentially have on your eyes. Anecdotally, most people recover with no issues whatsoever, but I'm not one to want to push that boundary and have to find out. Like, this is a short term experiment. By no means is this going to be some lifetime thing. So, we're going to see what happens with that. So basically short term, continuing the androgen experiment on antagonizing endogenous androgens at the androgen receptor to try and basically lower the androgen index on my head and get some regrowth there. And then the next things I kind of want to look at are the nandrolone monotherapy with estradiol, exogenous, like actual pills. And then following that, perhaps even a injectable SARM experiment with exogenous estradiol. So that's something I'm really interested too, because there are SARMs with much better binding affinity than S4. It's just anecdotally, S4 is one of the ones that has, despite in the studies, it doesn't seem to have a significantly different androgenicity than something like, I don't know, LGD or something like Osterine. In practical application, S4 seems to be one of the most hair-safe SARMs there is. So it was kind of like the thing I wanted to evaluate. And personally, I have like the least experience with andorine. So it was something I kind of knock out like two birds, one stone, one experiment kind of thing. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to evaluate with this one. So I'll keep you guys posted, but that's where I'm at right now for all you guys who've been asking. Am I using RU right now? No, because it interferes with the results of the experiment. But long term, I don't know. Like, once I come to a conclusion of like all this kind of stuff, what I think is the most efficacious treatments, going all the way from like ketoconazole all the way down to like antagonizing androgens at the receptor with things like SARMs and anti-androgens and whatnot. Like, I'm gonna put out some sort of comprehensive guide, I feel like, or just like a compilation of perhaps even a course, to be honest. I think the demand for a course could be like, I think a lot of people want like a consolidated way to like see all this information rather than having to like jump between my videos. So I kind of want to put in the time to make like a step-by-step course of like lowest risk profile and like lowest sensitivity to hair loss, and kind of like all the way up to like the most hardcore thing once I have done everything, and then kind of give you guys my feedback on what I think is the best treatment options or whatever. And I don't know, this video is getting kind of long, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it. All my like hair loss prevention guys who are interested in the pharmacology and science of this stuff and even some bodybuilders who just want to learn how to maintain a decent physique and not have to go bald at the same time. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, subscribe. Check out my blog, moreplates.moredates.com. Support the channel with the links in the video description below. I have my turnkey nootropic formula in there, which personally, I no longer use my modafinil prescription just because of this formula, to be honest. It took me years to sort of nail down, and I think it's the best one on the market right now. And I promise you won't be disappointed if you try it. It's great for insane productivity, focus, etc. It also doubles as a pretty effective pre-workout if you're, you like the kind of like stimulant kick pre-workout. I also have where you can get your blood work down there. I have the diet model that I've followed for about a year now, or over a year now, to be honest, as well as a pretty good, I'm sure you've heard of Movement before. That's where I get all my watches and stuff. And yeah, if you want to support the channel, check out those links. And then if you guys don't mind, go to the iTunes link too. For if you don't listen to the podcast, like, that's fine. I would appreciate, though, if you guys could drop a 5-star rating there. Like, it really helps. Like, in addition to already the comments and the likes and just watching the video on YouTube, like, it helps the algorithm a lot for helping me, like, spread my message and get, pushed to an audience that isn't already subscribed to me. But on iTunes, you can actually leave a 5-star rating, and it helps a lot to spread the message of my content. So anyways, thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.